I am Scott Aaronson. I'm the Edison Electric Institute's Senior Vice President for Security and Preparedness. EEI is a trade association that represents all of the nation's investor-owned electric companies in places like Texas. That would be CenterPoint, Encore, Entergy, AEP. My group specifically, we help electric companies prepare for and respond to all hazards. So in addition to storms and fires and earthquakes, also things like pandemics and cyber and physical threats. The electric grid is critical infrastructure, and we're critical to national security and critical to the health and safety of communities. So my group works very closely with the companies and government to, again, prepare for and respond to all of these new hazards that we're facing.
I guess let's just walk it through like you did the other day, where you started with storm response has 4 stages, and just go from there.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I think people don't fully appreciate how much work goes into emergency response, where you are effectively rebuilding critical infrastructure in really dangerous conditions after a storm. And so to understand how all those things fit together, I'm more than happy to provide that context. So electric power restoration, emergency electric power restoration happens in 4 separate, but usually in parallel buckets. So what I would say is the 4 parts of a restoration begin before the storm even hits. You are looking at tracking where the storm is likely to hit, and then pre-positioning crews to be ready to go into the affected area as quickly as possible. Then you have to be able to access the area. That is, get into the area that has been damaged by the storm or the earthquake or the fire or any hazard. That's not as simple as it sounds, especially with in the case of Hurricane Beryl, where you had so many trees blocking roads and blocking access to the hardest hit areas. You then have to assess the damage, and assessing is understanding the nature of the impact. What kind of material, equipment, expertise do I need to be able to get the lights back on as quickly as possible? And then ultimately you restore power. And like I said, those 4 distinct portions of emergency power restoration often happen in parallel. You know, once that storm clears, we are accessing, assessing, and getting as many customers on as quickly as possible.
The storm Hurricane Beryl looked like it was gonna not even do much for Texas initially. When it comes to that first piece, and I guess, you know, preparation early on and storm tracking and all that, what goes into that specific thing, and does the timetable, is it kind of fixed, like where the industry standard or standard should be, you know, 7 days out, you should be preparing that something's in the Gulf, let's say, that could hit anywhere from Brownsville to somewhere on the west side of Florida?
Yeah, that's right. So electric companies are monitoring the tropics and just weather in general all the time. They employ meteorologists. They work with other experts, and we try to understand where storms are likely to hit and when they're likely to hit. In the case of Hurricane Beryl, we certainly expected impact in northern Mexico, with maybe a chance that it would hit that kind of Corpus, Brownsville area. And then over the course of the weekend after July 4th, it just kept moving further and further north until about 24 hours before landfall, it was recognized that it was going to be a direct hit to Houston.
Once the cone of uncertainty becomes a little more narrow, a little bit more focused, then talk about this next phase that seems to be of question, and a lot of folks have put out there, whether CenterPoint had really pre-staged enough resources or already had talked to their, like you mentioned to me, the partners that they have in the area already, where there's like a mutual agreement to be like, if something happens in Austin, we'll send something from Houston up in Dallas. Austin and Houston will go. Houston, Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, that kind of thing.
It really is a military movement of, you wait to see where the storm is going to land, and then you take crews from the area and put them into the most affected area. I guess I'd say it this way. So Centerpoint and all of the companies in Texas and along the Gulf Coast are members of what are known as mutual assistance groups. There is the Texas Mutual Assistance Group, or TexMag, and there is the Southeast Electric Exchange. And both SEE and TexMag were tracking that storm well before it made landfall. And so all of the companies in the region already were securing resources to bring close to where Beryl was likely to hit. And then once Beryl did make impact, then get those crews into the hardest hit areas as quickly as possible.
So let's fast track. The storm comes in. We're talking maybe by Monday afternoon into Tuesday morning. The storm has cleared, let's say, the area around the greater Houston area, the different counties, Harris County, let's say Montgomery, Galveston, Brazoria, so Fort Bend. The next step, the next stage, once the storm starts moving inland, is what?
So the next stage after the storm makes landfall, once it clears, right? So you need to let the storm clear. There was a lot of wind, there was a lot of tornadic activity after Hurricane Beryl made landfall. Once it cleared the area, that's when those thousands of people, both from the Centerpoint, their native crews, the crews that work for Centerpoint day in and day out, as well as the people who had been secured through that mutual assistance process, they all were then deployed to those companies that were most in need. That included Centerpoint, Texas New Mexico Power, Entergy Texas. And as it became clear where the most damage was, that's where the most number of crews went. So it really is this kind of constant access and assess. You access the area, understand where the impact was, you assess the damage, and you get the right crews into the right place to do the work as quickly and safely as possible.
And then once you've got the crews in place, you've got everybody pretty much deployed in the area that needs the most. After that, I think becomes a more complex because as you were sharing, it's not just a one size fits all operation. It becomes like the finessing of I think you were saying it was it wildlife or something, mitigation, vegetation, something that you mentioned. Uh,
The tree
all these,
removal.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's depending what you need. So one of the things that became very clear after people got into the impacted area when Beryl cleared is just how many trees were down. And so while originally there was a group of contractors and mutual assistance workers that were deployed, it became clear that they were going to need more vegetation management and tree and debris removal crews. And so a call goes out for more of those kinds of people, and more of those show up. Um, so again, it's this constant process of understanding the impact from the storm, assessing the damage, and getting the right people to do the right work in the right places. The other thing that happens after a storm clears is what you really want to do is get the largest number of customers up as quickly as possible. You know, we understand that being without power for an extended period of time is a hardship for anybody, especially given the how hot the weather has been down in the Houston area. And so the more people you can get restored as quickly as possible, that's less of a strain on some of those services that you need to provide to those people who are going to be without power for an extended period. Cooling centers, making sure that they have food and water, making sure that we're taking care of at-risk communities like hospitals and nursing homes. So it really is this balance of understanding how to get the most number of people up as quickly as possible and getting a lot of crews into the hardest hit areas so that work, that hard work of going kind of house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood, dealing with these trees can also commence.
One of the things that I thought was interesting when you shared that, and then when I started looking around over the weekend, once trucks started showing up in our neighborhood that we live in, our part of town, is that idea that these trucks all look the same, but there might be different expert type of um, workers that a lineman is probably not a generic term. It's probably a specific set of skills and what they're going for. But we're calling everybody in a truck a lineman, and that's probably doing a disservice to what is actually out there and being deployed.
You're exactly right. There are a lot of different areas of expertise that are there are a lot of different areas of expertise that are deployed in a storm like this. You're going to have traditional line crews, the people who restring the wire and who reset poles and who do the general maintenance, but you're going to have tree and debris removal. You're going to have people who are expert in distribution systems versus people who are expert in transmission systems. You're going to have people from the impacted company. You're going to have people who have never been to Houston before. And so helping them to understand where they're going, what they're doing, get those work packages, be able to go to the right place and do it safely really does take a lot of coordination, especially when you're talking about 15,000 people from 17 different states.
But, let's, I'm gonna, I know I sent you and Sarah this latest update from Centerpoint that they shared from over the weekend. But I just want to gauge, because you've got the expertise in having seen responses to, all kinds of different natural disasters. They talk about, they set up 21 staging sites, the most they've ever set up for a response like for anything. They assess damage to the system by walking over 8,500 miles of electric lines. They removed over 18,600 weekend trees, impacting lines representing over 75% of distribution circuits. They repaired or replaced over 2,100 of over 1.17 million distribution poles. And then they positioned mobile generation units at cooling centers, hospitals, senior living facilities, et cetera, et cetera. Like you said earlier, like military operation, it sounds like this was just enormous in scale.
When you go through statistics like that and understand the scope and scale of the damage and of the work that has to go into restoring and in some cases rebuilding infrastructure in really challenging conditions after a natural disaster, after a really powerful storm has come through an area, it really does put in context just how extraordinary this work is. And look, like I said before, being without power for an extended period of time is a hardship. But when you also recognize then that 2+ million people have been restored and or rebuilt in the last week, that's impressive. It's frustrating to those who are without power for that extended period of time, but it also, look, extreme weather is becoming more frequent and more severe. And I think we need to recognize that there are going to be incidents that cause power outages and damage to critical infrastructure, not just the electric power sector, but everything we rely on for our modern life. We need to be, we need to acknowledge that this is not simple, but all of these are opportunities to learn and get better. And the mantra of the industry has been better today than we were yesterday and better tomorrow than we are today. The electric power restoration process has evolved even just in the 15 years that I've been in proximity to it. You go back to something like Superstorm Sandy. It took my family in New Jersey 18 days to be fully restored from that. And that was also a Category 1. So I think that puts in some context that look, a week without power in the heat of Houston is terrible. But rebuilding that much of a system in a week is pretty impressive.
Was there anything that you think you could share just in your expertise, what it must have been like in like the control command center at Centerpoint? Like, I mean, is it like for deploying and getting in all of this information and putting it back out to the crews? What's that look like? What's that communication? I just think it's like, the mother of all dispatch centers, where you got like, the tens of thousands of people both bringing in information that you need to make the next call for whoever's going to go out.
What's really impressive to see with all electric companies that do emergency power restoration is they immediately go into emergency response mode. And so they use something called ICS, Incident Command Structure, that we actually learned from the military and first responders. And one person is in charge of that restoration, and that person is working with lots of different business units, both of their own and of these responders that are coming from out of state. identifying where the work needs to be done, creating work packages for them, and getting them out to the field to begin to begin the business of power restoration. That's what's happening. And I think another part of that, and this comes from incident command structure, is what's known as a PIO, a public information officer, is getting that information to the general public so that they can understand what to expect. I think one of the most important things that we can do is to communicate, because if you're going to be without power for 3 hours versus 3 days versus 3 weeks, you're making three very different decisions for your family and for your well-being. And so the more that we can provide that situational awareness, I think the better.
What do you think will be do you think all of these repairs helps us be more resilient for the next storm? Is that a fallacy, or is there any truth into that idea that they're replacing, they're repairing, so we've got to be more hardier?
So I think on the one hand, I would say yes, having cleared that many weakened trees and doing that much debris removal, both the electric company and Mother Nature have made the area more resilient. There are fewer trees that can make contact or come down on electric lines. That's a win. But you also have to recognize that what's happening right now is emergency power restoration. This isn't long-term resilience work. We're trying to get the electricity back on for customers and the community for their safety as quickly as possible. This will highlight the importance of resilience investments and more resilience, more building to a more resilient code going forward. So yes, the system is more resilient because a lot of hazard trees are out of the way and there's a lot of new infrastructure being put up. But I think this doesn't negate the need to continue to invest in the resilience of infrastructure of all sectors all across the country, because we are seeing more severe, more extreme, more frequent weather and other threats to critical infrastructure operations that we need to account for.
There's a lot of talk, obviously, ever since the whole winter storm or the Texas grid collapsed out of, they had too much demand on it. Is there, we talk generically in Texas now, ever since then, about the grid, and we need to be back on the US, we should get back onto the US grid and stop being this, Texas island of electrical grid. Would that have changed anything with this? I mean, is there any reason to have had said, oh yeah, that would have helped us somehow get through it?
No, not in this case. In this case, this wasn't a failure of the transmission system. That is the long interstate lines, or in Texas, the long lines from where electric generation is happening to where the customers are. This impacted customers themselves, right? This was down trees in backyards. This was distribution lines close to the customers that were impacted. So even if you had all of the generation capacity in the world, there was no way to get that electricity from where it's being made to where it's being consumed, because it was the part of the system that distributes electricity out to customers that was most heavily impacted.
At this point, for EEI and all the different companies that you all have as, is it members?
Members.
What are you hearing? What's the chatter about this situation right now? And obviously there's been a lot of pointed fingers from political levels to the millions of customers that have slowly been out or have been out of power and are slowly regaining it. What's the takeaway? What happens with this kind of experience that EEI then uses for help with the rest of the industry later?
Again, every storm is an opportunity to learn. And so we will absolutely do after action reviews of this particular storm. And were there things that could have been done differently, both from a operational standpoint and from a public messaging standpoint, that would have helped people understand the scope and scale of Hurricane Beryl? I get frustrated a little bit by the category system of storms. Well, it was just a category 1. it doesn't really, that doesn't tell the full story of what these storms can do to infrastructure. And so I think some of what we will do is to hold up a mirror, both to EEI and to the industry and with our partners across the industry and with government. What can we all be doing better to be more resilient, be better prepared, and do a good job of communicating what to expect to our customers and the communities that we serve?
And my last part would be just talking about what seems to have been, if I was to put into categories the hundreds, if not thousands of emails and phone messages left to us. Centerpoint's lying because this map shows that I either have electricity or, that I don't have it, but I actually do, or that it's energized. And what does energized mean? There seems to be, like, I'll just put it as bluntly as possible. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, for a while, all they had on there was, here's the number that have no electricity. Here are the numbers that we brought back online. That's all they had. And then they brought back out a map with different levels of detail, with an idea of potentially you'd get your electricity back by a certain date. Um, I'm by no means a GIS expert, but the map seemed to be rather crude and simple, and just conveying that basic information. Here's what it looks like now. Here's where we think we'll be at by a certain date. When it goes back to the idea that you said on Friday, general public's considerably more resilient than we think, but they need to know something. Kind of going back to, is it a 3 hour event? Is it a 3 day event? Is it a 3 week event?
Yeah, I think that there are always opportunities to improve situational awareness, public messaging, helping people understand where the damage is and what to expect. There's a former FEMA director, Brock Long, who's from the Gulf Coast, who was fond of saying the general public are the first responders, and we need to empower them to be able to be prepared and take care of themselves and their families. That doesn't obviate the responsibility of electric companies and other critical infrastructure providers to get their services back up as quickly as possible. But I do think, again, the general public is resilient, especially if we give them the tools to understand what they need to do. And so the better situational awareness we can provide, the more fidelity we can give on where those outages are and how quickly they'll be restored. That's one of the things that I think we as an industry can continue to get better at.
Has Centerpoint reached out to you or to EEI at all during this whole Beryl?
Yeah, we have worked with them since before the storm made landfall. Again, they're working more closely at an operational level with those mutual assistance groups, the people who are actually getting them crews. But to the extent that they needed any support from the federal government, from our partnerships with other sectors, we have been in close coordination. I'll tell you a quick, interesting story. One of the things that happened early on, the Department of Energy, who's got a responsibility not just for the electricity sector, but for oil and natural gas, observed that there was a Colonial Pipeline facility that needed electricity restored as quickly as possible. And we were able to identify that facility, let Centerpoint know that it was a priority. Centerpoint was able to respond so that there was not a bigger set of issues downstream from the oil and gas sector, and get that power restored. So that's just one example of the kind of coordination and collaboration that happens between the federal government, other critical sectors, and the affected companies. Again, just one sort of anecdote of that kind of level of coordination that happens.
Is there anything else that I should have asked that I didn't ask?
I don't think so. I appreciate your interest, right? I think it is important that customers and communities understand just how hard it can be to restore power safely and quickly in these sorts of conditions. I also think that people look at these storms and think, well, it didn't, the wind wasn't that bad at my house, or it didn't rain that much. Why is the power out? The energy grid is an interconnected machine. And just because your neighborhood or your small community was relatively unscathed doesn't mean that there's not something a little further upstream that was impacted. And so getting people to appreciate just how complicated storm restoration can be in these really trying conditions is something that's really important for the general public to know. And so I appreciate what you're doing to try to give some of that context and help people understand. Again, 15,000 people from 17 states down there in really trying conditions, doing really impressive work. We know how hard it can be to be without power, but we're trying to get it back on as quickly as possible.